The bitter wind howled outside, rattling the lonely cabin's shutters as Beatrice Gardiner huddled beneath the only blanket she had left, watching her breath materialize in frigid puffs before her face. Her fingers, nearly blue with cold, trembled as she tried to light a match, the last one in her possession. The flame flickered briefly before dying, like her hopes of surviving this Montana winter of 1878. Beatrice had never imagined she'd end up here alone, freezing and widowed at 22. 8 months ago, she and her husband Thomas had arrived with dreams of building a life on the frontier. Their modest cabin had been a symbol of possibility until the fever took him, leaving her to face the harsh realities of frontier life alone. The blizzard had been raging for 2 days now, and the firewood was gone. Beatrice closed her eyes, wondering if she would simply drift to sleep in the cold and never wake. The thought was interrupted by an unexpected sound cutting through the howling wind, hoofbeats approaching, then a heavy knock that seemed to shake the entire cabin. "Hello, anybody in there?" a deep voice called out. Beatrice struggled to her feet, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders as she made her way to the door. Her fingers were so numb she could barely lift the latch. When she pulled it open, snow swirled in along with a tall figure bundled in heavy winter clothes. "Madam, you're half frozen," the man said, his voice tinged with concern as he took in her blue lips and trembling form. I'm all out of firewood," Beatrice managed, her teeth chattering. "That won't do," he said, pushing the door closed behind him. "Name's Xavier Tanner. Most folks just call me X." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair flecked with snow and intense eyes that assessed her condition quickly. "You need warmth, and you need it now." Before Beatrice could respond, Xavier was back outside. She could hear him moving around the cabin, and moments later he returned with an armload of wood from his packhorse. "This'll get us started," he said, kneeling by the stone fireplace. His movements were swift and sure as he arranged kindling and logs. "Got a match?" "Used my last one," she admitted, embarrassment warming her cheeks more than any fire could. Xavier produced a tin from his coat pocket. "Always carry these, essential out here." With practiced hands, he struck a match and held it to the kindling. A small flame emerged, growing steadily as he gently blew on it. "Thank you," Beatrice whispered, inching closer to the nascent warmth. "I'm Beatrice Gardiner." "You out here all alone, Miss Gardiner?" Xavier asked, his eyes not leaving the growing fire. "Mrs. Gardiner," she corrected softly, "or at least I was. My husband, he passed last spring." Xavier's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that." He added another log to the fire, which was now crackling cheerfully. "No one should be alone out here, especially not during winter." As the fire strengthened, Xavier removed his coat and outer layers. Beatrice could now see that he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 26 or 27. His face bore the weathered look of a man who spent his days under the open sky, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that contradicted his rugged appearance. "Got any coffee?" he asked, glancing around the sparse cabin. "A little," Beatrice replied, moving toward a small shelf. Her legs buckled slightly, weak from the cold and hunger. Xavier was at her side in an instant, strong hands steadying her. "You sit. I'll see what I can find." For the first time in months, Beatrice allowed someone else to take charge. She watched as Xavier moved efficiently around her small cabin, finding a pot, filling it with snow to melt for water, and locating the precious coffee. "What brings you out in this weather, Mr. Tanner?" she asked, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Just passing through," he replied, hanging the pot over the fire. "Was heading to Silverton when the storm hit. Saw the smoke from your cabin earlier or lack thereof and thought I'd check. Good thing I did." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Yes, it was a good thing he did, or she might not have survived the night. "You been out here long?" he asked, settling on the floor near the fire, his long legs stretched out. "Since last March. Thomas, my husband, he had big dreams about ranching out here." Beatrice gazed into the fire, remembering. "We were just getting started when he caught the fever." Xavier nodded solemnly. The frontier doesn't forgive unpreparedness. No family to go back to. Beatrice shook her head. My parents passed years ago. I have a sister in Chicago, but... She trailed off, unwilling to explain the complex estrangement that kept her from seeking refuge with her only living relative. Well, Xavier said, pouring the now boiling water into 2 tin cups with coffee grounds, storm like this isn't letting up anytime soon. If you don't mind company, I could help you get some proper firewood stocked. The offer was practical, free of pity, and exactly what Beatrice needed. I'd appreciate that, she said, accepting the cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but its warmth spread through her like life itself. As darkness fell completely outside, the cabin transformed from a cold tomb to a sanctuary of warmth. Xavier had brought in more wood from his supplies and managed to find some jerky and hardtack in his saddlebags, which they shared in companionable silence. You know, Xavier said eventually, surviving out here alone takes more than just courage, takes knowledge. Are you saying I lack knowledge, Mr. Tanner? Beatrice raised an eyebrow, a hint of her old spirit flickering to life. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'm saying even the most knowledgeable folks need help sometimes. Pride's what gets people killed out here. Beatrice couldn't argue with that. And what about you? Do you ever need help? More times than I can count, he admitted readily. No man's an island, especially not in this territory. They talked through the evening, Xavier sharing stories of his travels across the frontier, Beatrice speaking of her life before Montana, her upbringing in Pennsylvania, the books she loved, the piano she'd reluctantly left behind. It felt strange to speak so freely with a stranger, but there was something about Xavier Tanner that invited confidence. When Beatrice's eyes grew heavy, Xavier insisted she take the small bed while he made a pallet near the fire. She was too exhausted to argue, and for the first time in months, she fell asleep feeling safe. The blizzard continued for 3 days. In that time, Xavier proved himself invaluable. He repaired a leak in the cabin's roof, fashioned a proper woodpile that would last weeks, and even managed to hunt a rabbit when there was a brief break in the storm, providing them with a hearty stew that restored Beatrice's strength. More than the practical help, though, Beatrice found herself grateful for his company. The loneliness that had been her constant companion since Thomas's death receded in Xavier's presence. They established a routine, Xavier tending to the outdoor tasks and Beatrice maintaining the cabin interior. In the evenings, they would talk by the fire, learning each other's stories piece by piece. My father was a blacksmith, Xavier told her on the 3rd night as they sat by the fire. Wanted me to take over the family business, but I couldn't stand being confined to one place. So you became a wanderer instead? Beatrice asked, mending a tear in one of her dresses. Not exactly. Xavier poked at the fire thoughtfully. I worked cattle drives for a while, did some scouting for the army. Now I mostly transport goods between settlements. Less dangerous than driving cattle, more interesting than staying put. And no one's waiting for you somewhere. The question slipped out before Beatrice could stop it. Xavier's expression remained neutral. No one's waiting. What about you? Once spring comes, will you head back east? Beatrice considered the question. It was one she'd asked herself countless times since Thomas's death. I don't know. This place was Thomas's dream, not mine, but it's mine now, I suppose. Dreams can change, Xavier said softly. Sometimes they have to. On the 4th morning, Beatrice woke to sunshine streaming through the cabin's small window. The storm had finally passed. She found Xavier outside, clearing a path through the snow. Looks like I'll be able to head out tomorrow, he said when he noticed her watching from the doorway. The news should have been expected, but it hit Beatrice like a physical blow. Oh, of course. Xavier leaned on his shovel, studying her face. Unless you'd like me to stay another day, make sure you're properly set up. I wouldn't want to delay your journey, Beatrice said, though every part of her wanted to ask him to stay. My business in Silverton can wait, he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. That day, Xavier showed Beatrice how to properly chop and stack wood, how to identify animal tracks in the snow, and how to set simple snares for rabbits. The lessons were practical, but there was an undercurrent of something more in every shared glance, every accidental touch of their hands. "You're a quick study," Xavier commented as Beatrice successfully split a log on her first try. "I had a good teacher," she replied, brushing sawdust from her skirt. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating a stew Beatrice had prepared, Xavier cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "A dangerous pastime," Beatrice teased, surprising herself with the lightness in her tone. Xavier smiled. "Maybe so, but I was thinking that when I finish my business in Silverton, I could stop back here, check how you're getting on." Beatrice's heart quickened. "It would be a long detour for you." "Not so long," he said, his voice soft, "and well worth it from where I'm sitting." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of possibility, of the seed of something that might, with care, grow into more. "I would like that," Beatrice said finally. Xavier left the next morning after breakfast, his packhorse loaded and ready for the journey. Standing in the doorway of the cabin that no longer felt quite so lonely, Beatrice watched him prepare to depart. "I'll be back in about 2 weeks," he said, adjusting his saddle. "Think you can manage till then?" "I believe I can," she replied with newfound confidence. "You've taught me well." Xavier mounted his horse, then hesitated. "Beatrice," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I want you to have this." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch. Beatrice opened it to find flint, steel, and tinder, a reliable way to start fires without matches. "So you never have to worry about the cold again," Xavier explained. The simple gift meant more than any elaborate present ever could. "Thank you," Beatrice said, clutching it tightly, "for everything." Xavier tipped his hat. "See you in 2 weeks, Mrs. Gardiner." As promised, Xavier returned 14 days later. Beatrice had counted each sunrise and sunset, preparing for his arrival by cleaning the cabin thoroughly and baking bread with the last of her flour. When she heard hoofbeats approaching, she couldn't stop herself from rushing outside to greet him. Xavier wasn't alone. Behind his horse, he led a packhorse loaded with supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, salt, dried beans, and more. "What's all this?" Beatrice asked as he dismounted. "Thought you might need some provisions," he said with a casual shrug that didn't quite mask the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. Over the next few months, Xavier established a pattern of visiting for a few days before heading out for his deliveries, always returning within a fortnight. Each time he came back, he brought not only supplies but also news from nearby settlements, books he'd found for Beatrice, and once, a small potted plant that now sat in her window. Spring arrived gradually, melting the snow and revealing the potential of the land around the cabin. Xavier helped Beatrice prepare a garden plot, showing her which vegetables would grow best in the mountain soil. "You've done this before," she observed as he demonstrated how to properly space potato plantings. "My mother always kept a garden," he explained. "She insisted I learn, said a man should know how to feed himself from the earth." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Xavier said, a shadow passing over his features. "Lost her to influenza when I was 17. Beatrice touched his arm lightly. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, covering her hand with his own for a brief moment before returning to the task at hand. As spring deepened into summer, the nature of their relationship shifted subtly. The practical partnership born of survival grew into a friendship, and then into something neither of them named but both recognized. Xavier's visits lengthened, his departures became more reluctant, and Beatrice found herself watching the horizon more eagerly for his return. One warm July evening, they sat outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Beatrice was mending one of Xavier's shirts while he carved a piece of wood with his pocket knife. "What are you making?" she asked, noticing the emerging shape. "A chess piece," he replied. A queen thought I might teach you to play. I'd like that, Beatrice said, studying his profile in the fading light. The question that had been on her mind for weeks finally found voice. Xavier, why do you keep coming back here? His hands stilled. You know why, Beatrice? I'd like to hear you say it, she insisted gently. Xavier set down his carving and turned to face her fully. Because when I'm away from here from you, nothing else feels quite right. Because in all my wandering, I've never found anywhere that feels like where I'm supposed to be. Until now, Beatrice's heart swelled. I feel the same way. Xavier reached out, taking her hand in his. I know it hasn't been that long since your husband passed. I know you might not be ready, I love Thomas, Beatrice interrupted softly. And when he died, I thought that part of my life was over. But then you knocked on my door in the middle of that blizzard and something started again. Something different but no less real. Beatrice, Xavier said, his voice low and earnest, I'm not a wealthy man. I don't have much to offer except my hands, my heart, and a promise to always find my way back to you. But if that's enough, it's more than enough, she whispered, leaning toward him. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Xavier's smile was brighter than Beatrice had ever seen it. Does this mean you'll finally let me fix that leaky roof properly? He asked, making her laugh. Only if you promise to be careful up there, she replied, squeezing his hand. As summer turned to fall, Xavier took fewer jobs, staying longer at the cabin each time. Together, they preserved the garden's bounty for winter, repaired the cabin's weaknesses, and collected firewood until the stack was taller than either of them. You could stay, Beatrice said one evening as they lay beside each other in the bed they now shared. Through the winter, I mean. Xavier was quiet for so long that Beatrice worried she'd overstepped. Then he propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with serious eyes. I could stay forever, he said, if that's what you want. Is it what you want? She asked, heart pounding. More than anything, he admitted. But I've been thinking. This cabin, this land, it's tied to your past, to Thomas. If we're going to build something together, maybe we should do it somewhere new, somewhere that's just ours. Beatrice considered his words, looking around the cabin that had been both prison and sanctuary to her. Where would we go? There's good land about 50 miles south of here, Xavier said. Near enough to town for supplies, far enough for privacy, beautiful creek running through it. I've had my eye on it for a while. You have? Beatrice asked, surprised. Xavier's expression turned sheepish. Since about my third visit here, thought it might be presumptuous to mention it before now. Beatrice laughed softly. You've been planning our future while I've been worrying about scaring you away by asking you to winter here. Looks that way, he said with a grin. The decision was made that night. They would sell Thomas's land and cabin to a family Xavier knew was looking to settle in the area, and use the money to establish their new home before winter set in. The next morning, Xavier rode to town to send telegrams and begin the arrangements. The weeks that followed were a flurry of activity. Beatrice packed the few personal items she wanted to keep while Xavier negotiated the sale and purchase of land. By mid-October, everything was ready. The Petersons, a young couple with 2 small children, would take over the cabin, grateful for the established garden and sturdy shelter. On their last night in the cabin, Beatrice felt a strange mixture of emotions. She stood in the doorway, looking at the space that had seen so much of her life, her hopes with Thomas, her despair after his death, and finally, her unexpected second chance at happiness with Xavier. Having second thoughts? Xavier asked, coming to stand behind her. Beatrice leaned back against his chest. No, just saying goodbye to a chapter of my life. This place saved me in a way. If Thomas and I hadn't come here, if he hadn't built this cabin, I never would have met you. Xavier wrapped his arms around her waist. Then I'm grateful for it too. But I'm more excited about what comes next. The journey to their new land took 2 days. Xavier had arranged for a wagon to transport their belongings while they rode alongside on horseback. When they finally crested a ridge and Beatrice saw their destination for the first time, she gasped in delight. A clear creek wound through a valley framed by distant mountains. Wildflowers still bloomed in patches despite the autumn chill, and a grove of aspen trees shimmered golden in the sunlight. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "And it's ours," Xavier said, pride evident in his voice. "All 50 acres. They made camp that night beside the creek, planning where they would build their home. Xavier had already arranged for lumber to be delivered the following week, and several men from the nearest settlement had agreed to help with the construction in exchange for Xavier's promise to assist with their harvests. "It will be a simple cabin to start," Xavier explained as they sat by the campfire. "But we can add to it over time, maybe a proper bedroom for children someday." Beatrice's heart skipped at the mention of children. "You want a family," Xavier's expression softened. "With you, yes. Though if that's not what you want, it is," she assured him quickly. "Very much so." The construction of their new home progressed rapidly. Xavier proved as skilled at building as he was at everything else he set his mind to, and the community welcomed them warmly, several families bringing food and offering assistance. By early December, the cabin was complete, larger than Beatrice's old home, with proper windows, a sturdy stone fireplace, and even a small porch. On the day they officially moved in, a light snow began to fall. Beatrice stood on the porch, watching the flakes drift down, transformed from harbingers of dread to bearers of beauty now that she no longer faced winter alone. "Come inside," Xavier called from the doorway. "I've got something to show you." Beatrice followed him into their new home, where a fire already burned cheerfully in the fireplace. In front of it sat a small table set with their 2 plates, and a bottle of wine Xavier must have been saving for this occasion. "It's not much of a housewarming," he said, suddenly appearing nervous. "But I wanted to mark the occasion properly." "It's perfect," Beatrice assured him, touched by the gesture. Xavier pulled out a chair for her, then poured the wine. Instead of sitting across from her, however, he knelt beside her chair, reaching into his pocket. "Beatrice Gardiner," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "When I found you in that cabin last winter, I was just a man trying to help someone in need. I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would change everything for me." He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold band. "This was my mother's. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person. I found her in you." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as Xavier continued. "I know we've done everything backwards, building a home together before making any formal promises, but I want to do this right. Will you marry me, Beatrice? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children?" "Yes," she whispered, unable to say more past the emotion clogging her throat. "Yes, Xavier." He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood, pulling her up into an embrace that felt like coming home. As they held each other by the fire in the cabin they had built together, Beatrice marveled at how far she had come from that desperate night when a stranger had knocked on her door. They were married 2 weeks later in the town's small church, with their new neighbors as witnesses. The winter passed in a cocoon of warmth and love as they settled into their life together. Xavier no longer needed to take delivery jobs. They had enough saved to focus on establishing their ranch. By spring, their small herd of cattle had grown, the garden was planted, and Beatrice had news of her own to share. On a perfect April morning, as they sat on their porch watching the sunrise, she took Xavier's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "Really?" he asked, eyes wide with wonder. Beatrice nodded, smiling at the joy spreading across his face. "When? Late autumn, the doctor thinks," she replied. "Just in time for our first anniversary." Xavier gathered her into his arms, his happiness palpable. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed. "A home, a wife, a child on the way. For so long the road was all I knew." "And now?" Beatrice asked, though she knew the answer. Xavier looked out at their land, at the life they were building, then back at her with eyes full of love. "Now I know that the journey only matters if it leads you home." That night, As snow began to fall once again, they sat together by the fire in their cabin, no longer lonely, no longer silent, but filled with the warmth of love and the promise of the future they would build together.